Enneagram podcast.
We did a whole season.
We did. I can't believe it. It's a miracle.
That's really exciting. And we have a special episode for you today.
We do. So in this episode, we are going to be reading a letter from one of our fans, I guess you could call. Fans, friends, followers, like cool party people.
Fellow Enneagram enthusiast.
Yes, fellow Enneagram enthusiast.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be reading a letter that this person wrote to us, and we're going to be dissecting a little bit about what they share and sharing some kind of tips for growth and just some kind of insight into how to use this model in a practical and compassionate way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Hannah's going to read the letter for us, and then we'll get started.
So just to give you a fun little tidbit before we get started, this email came to us and the subject line is Letter to the Enneagram Fairies.
Dear Enneagram Fairies. Oh my gosh, don't you just want to be a fairy? I totally do.
It's funny, a good friend from high school used to call me the Fairy Queen. That was my nickname.
I like
call
that.
me the Fairy Queen.
I like
so,
that.
I secretly want to be a fairy still, so that's really good. So our letter says, Dear Empowered Enneagram, I'm a self-preservation 1, wing 2, and have spent my whole Enneagram chapter of life the past 15 years. We can do this work for years and years and years, and we're still not done. Thinking that my mom was a 3, it seemed to help me conceptualize her lack of vulnerability, her resistance to expressing uncomfortable feelings, and her investment in performing and maintaining a strong image out in the world. I recently learned that she's a self-preservation 4, the most mistyped of the Enneagram I now know. I'm having so much stuff come up about it. It now makes so much sense that not only a 1, but an intuitive and highly empathic 1, I've been triggered by all of these supposed to feels I felt from her that were not acknowledged. So the things that, her mother's feelings that weren't acknowledged and her own feelings that were not acknowledged. By how much I subconsciously felt responsible for her feelings. 1's a responsibility, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you are.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing.
And how much I've been programmed to embrace and even create suffering for myself throughout my life because of the imprinting of her energetics. As I unpack this, I'm curious what you can offer me to support the recalibration of this relationship. The recalibration process was already going, but there seems to be some epic invitations for growth and insight by seeing this particular dynamic more clearly now.
Thanks, love.
Thank you.
Yeah, so...
What a great letter.
Oh my gosh, it's such a great letter. Yeah, so the first thing that I'll just say is that I'm so grateful to have received this person's vulnerability and their courage to reach out to us and share about a piece of their life and just kind of what's important to them and what's going on. And it's so brave whenever we step into this space where we're ready to receive feedback and grow. That's a space that we can really decide when we're ready for that, and we can only really consult places that we feel safe. So I just feel really honored that this person decided to reach out to us in this way.
Yeah. And this letter just really it illustrates how dynamic our human relationships can be, and especially those relationships with families, and really paints a pretty cool picture about typing other people, like using the Enneagram for yourself and your own growth as a tool for insight and work, but then also using that to understand other people. So we wanted to talk a little bit first just about typing others, because it's probably one of the biggest things that people love to do. As soon as they learn about the Enneagram, they're like, oh, I think my mom is this, and I think my uncle is this, my best friend is this,
my partner is this. And it's really fun, and it's a really can be a use of the Enneagram for sure, to kind of help us understand our relationships. But really, the danger is that the Enneagram is about our internal experience. It's not about our behavior. It's not about what we look like to the outside world. It's about our internal experience. And nobody else really knows what's going on inside of another person. Nobody knows what's going on inside of me. Only I know that. And therefore, only I can validate my EnneaType, because my EnneaType is really about my internal experience, and nobody else knows that but me. So only I can really say, this is what I am, or this is not what I am.
And the whole point of the Enneagram is your own self-work. And even if you have your type wrong, if you've mistyped yourself, and you're still working with it to think about your patterns and your history and everything, that's still okay. That's all good.
Yeah, it's all part of this really important process, and we have to kind of have that process deeply and kind of in our own time, in our own way with ourselves, and we have to let other people have their process with their type also. So I think it's important to just recognize that, it's dangerous to type other people without their validation. Whenever I am introducing the Enneagram to someone, I usually say something to them, and not that I'm perfect at this, because I'm not, but I usually say something to them like, you might want to read about this, or here's a description that I found, let me know if that sits, how that sits with you and what that's like for you. Yeah.
Or like this part of my experience of our relationship, like I see some similarities when I read about this type. Like, how do you feel about that? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. Which this person, because I know them, they probably did that.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm sure they did that. Yeah, I'm sure that. So I think this letter is just also like a really good opportunity for us to talk about
in general,
typing other people.
Yeah, but it is when we read about all the EnneaTypes and we learn about it, it's incredible because we start seeing people in our lives as we're hearing the descriptions. And one of the most beautiful parts of the Enneagram is that when people learn it, often, at least when they do our trainings, the number one piece of feedback that we get is, oh my gosh, I have so much compassion for this type or this person in my life now, because I didn't know, like with type 1, I didn't know how much fear and badness they felt in their lives, and how hard it was for them not beat themselves up, and how important it is to get things right. I just thought I was being judged. And so there's this depersonalization that happens, like it gives us permission to not take things personally, and also invites us to practice compassion, not only for ourselves, but for other people.
Yeah.
And so in this particular case with this letter, our reader thought that her mother was a 3, based on all of kind of the descriptions of 3. But since learning about self-preservation 4, that type makes a lot more sense. So what part of that should we dive into first? This is a really rich letter. There's a lot here.
Well, self-pres 4 is the most mistyped type on the Enneagram, and Hanna happens to be a self-pres 4, so she had a long journey with kind of her finding her EnneaType, and she talks about that in a different video, but and a different podcast episode. But maybe you can just talk a little bit about why self-pres 4 is different than the other 4s.
Yeah. Well, so the other 2 4s, they have a bit of overt emotionality that you can see in them. They're more likely to talk about their feelings. The sexual or the intimate 4 might be complaining a little more about things, or it might be coming out in this angry, kind of competitive part. The social 4, it's going to be a little more sad. It's almost like, I'm going to talk about my feelings so you can hopefully relate to me and do some connecting there. For self-preservation 4, it's very difficult for them to talk about their feelings. Just an example of this, when I first started therapy when I was 19, one of my very first tasks that my therapist had me work on was feeling my feelings. She said to me, she was like, Hanna, you just told this really awful, horrible story, and you didn't have an ounce of emotion in your voice or on your face. It doesn't seem like you're feeling anything. And my response to her was, is that bad? I thought that I was supposed to be strong. So there was just this stoicism there. And self-preservation 4s have all of the deep seated emotionality and shame and all of that the other 4s do, but they're not wearing it outside of themselves, and you probably won't see it. It's hard for self-preservation 4 to ask for help, to let others in on what they're feeling, because that disrupts the enduring pattern. For this 4, the enduring 4, they're trying to, they're long suffering, and they're trying to win love and worth through suffering. It's almost like, I have to be strong to be able to get through all of this. And if I don't, there's something weak about me, and they can get in touch with that feeling of shame when they stop enduring. So the pattern it seems very, very different on the outside than the other 4s, and that's why it's one of the most mistyped, maybe the most mistyped on the Enneagram.
Yeah, that notion that it's the most mistyped on the Enneagram, by the way, comes from our favorite subtype teacher, Beatrice Chestnut. And so I'll just talk a little bit about, so if you put that energy, that like enduring energy, in relationship with a self-pres 1. So a self-pres 1 is super, each of the ones have a relationship with perfecting something. Mm-hmm. And the self-pres 1, their relationship with perfecting is about themselves. So self-pres 1 is the hardest on themselves of all the ones. All ones are really hard on themselves, but the self-pres 1 in particular is super, super hard on themselves.
Mm-hmm. And probably the most highly self-critical on the entire Enneagram.
Yeah.
Self-pres 1.
So they, often develop like really rigid rules for themselves. They're kind of constantly monitoring their behavior. So you put that in combination with a self-pres 4, and yeah, you're going to get some of this kind of enduring suffering energy. Mm-hmm. I'll just kind of pause here before we dive into the dynamic too much to just say that it's really, subtypes are really important. So, the 9 types are the basis of the Enneagram of personality, but subtype is probably the most important tool for self-identifying who you, like, what type you resonate with. Like, if you, maybe there are elements of your type that you don't fully get, or you feel like, I don't have that element of it, oftentimes that can be explained by subtype. So it's a good idea if you have an idea of your type, but you're not fully sure, to read through all 3 of the subtypes, because that can be a great process of elimination for you. Mm-hmm. So I think, on the surface, a self-pres 4 can actually look a lot like a 3. Mm-hmm. They can, they have the same kind of lack of emotionality, the same stoicism. They hardworking. They don't complain. Mm-hmm. They're not overly emotional. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I, especially if you're a self-preservation 4 with a 3 wing, which is what I am, you're going to look even more like a 3. If you have a 5 wing, there's a little more of the withdrawn, probably not as shiny and bubbly. Mm-hmm. But self-preservation 4 with a 3 wing definitely looks a lot like a 3. Mm-hmm. But there's some key distinguishing features internally, how those types experience their type, and then even externally what we can view. So how do you think that a 3 is different than a self-preservation 4 on the outside, like what someone would be able to view?
Well, I think image-wise, there's definitely a difference. For self-pres 3, it's about conforming to a certain ideal, like conforming to, I live in the mountains, so I wear a lot of mountain gear, or I'm part of the professional world, so I wear a tie all the time. There's like a desire to conform to whatever culture that they are around. And with 4, it's like I don't care about that, I'm just myself, right? Mm-hmm. And I often see with 4s visually that they have kind of a uniform. So for Hanna, like, she always has interesting earrings. Her hair is always the same color. She used to wear scarves a lot until I pointed it out. Now she doesn't. Now she wears
that.
Now she wears long necklaces or really funky earrings and boots. And she has like this kind of, she has like a jewel tone color palette that she always chooses her clothes from. You know, she's got like kind of a uniform about the way that she dresses. I could totally go into a department store and be like, Hanna would wear that, Hanna would wear that, Hanna would never wear that, right?
I hate to be so predictable.
She's dying on the inside right now.
Yeah.
Right. Right. But it's really about Hanna and who Hanna is. It's not about this culture that Hanna is trying to be a part of. Mm-hmm. And that's a really big difference. Like the internal motivation of how I craft my life. For Hanna, it's going to be really about like self and what self wants and how self feels. And for a 3, it's more about like, what is the external environment demanding of me and how do I meet those expectations?
Yeah.
That's how I would answer that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. What do you think? Anything you want to add?
I think that was good.
Okay.
I think that was good.
Good.
So for this particular reader and their experience of their mother's type, figuring out that their mother is possibly self-preservation 4, and our 1 said that she feels responsible for the lack of feeling in the mom, which is such a trait of 1 to feel responsible for things that aren't actually under their control.
Yeah. Sweet reader, you have absolutely no control over your mom's feelings.
Yeah.
Or whether your mom chooses to actively engage in working on herself the way that you work on yourself.
Yeah.
The other thing I really would say to this reader is that probably no one is ever going to work on themselves like you. No one is ever going to do it like you do it. No one is ever going to have the motivation to follow the rules of self-growth the way that you are. And if you are expecting them to, you may be setting yourself up for some suffering.
Yeah. And self-preservation 4s are certainly setting themselves up for suffering. That's part of the fixation. And for another type, or if you're in a relationship with a self-preservation 4, you certainly can get sucked into that.
Sure.
And there's also no convincing a 4 that their suffering is needless, or that enduring is not the path for them to get what they want or the way of dealing with life. That is up to that self-preservation 4. And this is for any type, by the way. We just happen to be talking about 1s and 4s, and we have to allow other people to do their own work. A lot of people try to use the Enneagram as a way of trying to figure out how they should interact with others in a way of changing others, or in a way of very sweetly, like trying to make their relationships better. And we can do that by practicing awareness and by conversations and by practicing compassion. But ultimately, self-work is up to the individual. And just like Monica said, if you are trying to get someone to change, or trying to get them to be healthier than they are, or to be farther in their process than they are, you're setting yourself up for failure and for a lot of heartache, because we can't do other people's work for them. We just can't.
Right. So as far as the recalibration of the relationship, which, by the way, I love the way that you phrase that.
Yeah.
The most loving thing that we can ever do for other people is to focus on our path and our growth, and really let go of any expectation of the other person following us, because they may choose to do that and they may not. And it doesn't mean anything about how they feel about us if they choose not to come with us. That's just about them, and it's about their process. And so I think it sounds like you are a person that does really, really, really amazing work with themselves, and that you do a lot of introspection and a lot of reflecting on your life. And I would encourage you to keep doing that, but develop a lens of compassion and ease for yourself.
Yeah.
So do the things that feel like kind of sweet and kind of like when you think about them, it's like a and kind of what I'm referring to here is let yourself be mad at mom. You know, I think it sounds like part of the taking responsibility is avoiding the anger that you feel for like feeling like you had to be responsible. And it sounds like that anger really needs to be felt. You know, if maybe it needs to be expressed, I don't know, but
right. And
yeah.
You know, if mom isn't able to be in touch with her own feelings and her own, you know, which a lot of self-preservation for is that's them. It's not your responsibility as a kid or as an adult to make them feel that. And also they probably can't be present with you and your feelings if they're not present with themselves. And the grief and the loss that's associated with that, especially if it's from a parent and from not being seen, it's a type of wound that takes some nurturing and takes some care and some sending love to that part of you, because you know we are all doing the best that we can with what we've got, and sometimes that means that in relationships we don't have the ideal and we don't get exactly what we needed. And I argue that most nurturing like relationships or as children, like most of us don't get the ideal childhood or ideally what we need.
Does anybody, if you are a person that feels like you got exactly what you needed when you were growing up, all of it, please contact me. I'd like to meet you.
Well, and too, another good point of this about the Enneagram is that even if you come from this super duper healthy family with like really good boundaries and lots of support and love, you still have an Enneagram fixation.
Yes.
And you still might be feeling some lack because of that. And that is the human journey.
Yeah. And to apply that concept to this situation, I tell this person then that, you know, your fixation of self-pres 1 is going to create suffering for you regardless of what type your mom is. Mm-hmm. You are, you know, self-pres 1s are the most, like, they, you know, what's the thing? Flagellate?
Oh, self-flagellation.
That's it. Yeah, I was, like, thinking of flatulence, like farting. And I was like, that's not what I mean. I don't mean farting. I mean, like, spanking yourself with the whip, you know? Like, whatcha!
Yeah.
Right? So
self-punishing.
That's right. Self-pres 1s are that anyway. Yeah. So, honestly, like, our families really support our fixation, but they don't cause it. So we're born with it, and, you know, so regardless of who your mom is, and even if she had been able to take full responsibility for her feelings or model perfect feeling to you, you know, if you have this particular fixation, you're gonna suffer. You're gonna feel the things that a self-pres 1 feels. You're gonna go through the things, and it's not going to serve you to focus on someone else's journey.
Right. If anything, it's focusing on your own journey and being able to offer yourself love and compassion and permission to not be responsible.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like there's so much feelings of being responsible for everything. Mm-hmm. And it is a burden to carry and not an easy thing to let go of. No. None of this work is easy. But that is a good goal of building compassion for yourself and understanding that you are not responsible. You're not responsible for anyone's feelings, except your own.
Yes. So I propose that we end our episode today with giving our sweet reader a permission slip. A permission slip. What do you think about that? Are you on board? You look on board. You look really excited.
I am on board. I'm looking for a piece of paper.
No, I don't want to write it down. We're just going to give you... So, sweet reader, we are going to give you some permission. So, I'm going to give you permission to feel as angry as you need to. Mm-hmm. To really grieve the loss of what you thought this relationship was going to be. And I'm going to give you permission to do whatever will create ease for you. So that means, maybe this relationship changes. And if that feels like it would make your life easier to let go of some things in it,
let go of some
do
expectations
it. Yeah.
about the relationship.
Yeah. You have full permission to do that. Hannah, what's your permission slip for our reader?
My permission slip is to not get sucked in to the pattern of self-preservation 4, because that is their work. And I will say that as a self-preservation 4, one of some of the most loving things that people have done for me is to set boundaries with me around my enduring, and letting me know how my pattern impacts them. And so I will add, as a final note, about like relationship work and trying to make those relationships better, feel free to talk to your mom about how that part of her is impacting you. Remaining curious and open that maybe she's not a self-preservation 4, she might be something else. Let her do that. And also holding the expectation that it's okay if nothing changes from that. And if, the communication lines aren't open, that might not be where the relationship is at right now. And that's okay.
Yeah. So thanks to all you guys listening. Thanks to this person that wrote us this really awesome letter. By the way, we take these letter submissions on our email, so you can email us at empoweredenneagram@gmail.com. You can also write a letter on Instagram and tag us in it. If you are cool with being that visible, you can write us one on our DMs or in our Facebook Messenger. We're open to receiving these kinds of letters all the time. So if you have an issue that you're struggling with or something that you feel like the Enneagram could really help you with, but maybe you have kind of stuck places or just feeling kind of blocked, just know that you feel free to reach out to us. And we promise we will be in contact with you before we read it. So if you write it and then you're like, I don't know, maybe that would be bad.
Right. We don't ever share anything without your permission.
Don't worry. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. That's season 1.
Thank you. We'll see you next season.
See you next season. Bye.